On 620 South Main Street of Los Angeles, California, sits a rather unassuming-looking hotel. Opened on December 20th of 1924, the 19-story 700-room hotel had recently undergone something of a makeover. It's now known as the Stay on Main and has been undergoing renovations for the last few years and is due to open again in October of 2021. But whether or not the hotel will see many bookings is anyone's guess, as the place has, shall we say, a rather dark past. You see, for almost 100 years, the Stay on Main was known as the Cecil Hotel, and it's most famous for being the site of an inordinate number of murders, people taking their own lives, and otherwise unexplainable deaths. In the early 1920s, American hoteliers William Hanner, Charles Dix, and Robert Shops pulled together their capital and opened the Cecil as ideal accommodation for travelers and tourists alike. Designed and constructed in the Beaux Arts style, the hotel boasted an opulent marble lobby with stained glass windows, potted palms, and alabaster statuary. Each of the hoteliers brought a vast amount of business acumen to the table, and it seemed the Cecil was destined to be a roaring success. But within 5 years of its grand opening, America would plunge into financial ruin, as Wall Street would bring one of the darkest days in U.S. stock market history. It's little surprise that this tumultuous event is the thing that seems to have preceded such a morbid decline, but even for such a depressing period of history, the Cecil seems to have been the center of some kind of grim maelstrom, as the deaths came thick and fast from then on. In November of 1931, 46-year-old W.K. Norton took his own life by ingesting poison. A week prior, he had checked into the Cecil under the guise of a man named James Willies from Chicago. It's not certain why Norton took his own life, but it's been commonly speculated that it was related to the financial crisis of the previous 2 years. Less than a year later, in September of 1932, 25-year-old Benjamin Dodich shot himself in the head while sitting on a Cecil hotel bed. A maid found his body the following morning, but again, it's not clear why the young man decided to take his own life, as he neglected to leave a note. In late July of 1934, former Army Medical Corps Sergeant Louis D. Borden checked into a room at the Cecil, only to slash his own throat with a straight razor in the hotel bathroom. Yet unlike the previous two, the 53-year-old left several notes, one of which cited poor health as the reason for his actions. A tragic yet perfectly understandable reason to take your own life, but just as terrifying and bizarre was that he too should gravitate to the Cecil in the final hours of his life. In the decade that followed, many more of these unexplained deaths would occur, around a third of them involving military men. But the nature of the deaths at the Cecil would not evolve until September of 1944, when a young woman named Dorothy Jean Purcell seemed to be overcome with a temporary but terrible madness. Dorothy had booked a stay at the Cecil with her 38-year-old boyfriend, Ben Levine. All was well until the middle of the night when Dorothy awoke in terrible pain. She soon realized that what she was experiencing was contractions and that she was going into labor. Terrified and confused, she dragged herself into the hotel bathroom, quietly giving birth to a tiny baby boy. Dorothy later claimed that she had no idea she was even pregnant, and as such, she'd done absolutely no research into what to expect. According to her, the baby was silent as the grave, leading her to believe that it was some kind of stillbirth. Yet, instead of waking her boyfriend or calling for help, Dorothy Purcell opened up the bathroom window as quietly as she could, then tossed her infant son out into the night. The deceased child was later found on the roof of an adjacent building, yet it was determined that the child had still been alive at the time it had been thrown from the hotel window. Naturally, there was a palpable level of public outrage once the story graced local newspapers, and Dorothy Purcell was tracked down and arrested on suspicion of murder. However, after being psychoanalyzed by not one but 3 psychiatrists, Dorothy was determined to be mentally confused at the time of the birth and was acquitted in January of 1945 by reason of insanity. By all accounts, she'd had no history of mental health problems prior to checking into the Cecil and had absolutely no explanation for the event itself. It seems like a horrible coincidence that such a thing would occur while staying at the Cecil Hotel, but the question remains, were there other forces at work which induced both Dorothy's labor and the so-called confused state that followed? Between 1944 and 1962, a handful of other people took their own lives at the Cecil Hotel, all of them involving death by falling. One of these was particularly gruesome, given that it didn't just take one life, but two. On October 12th of 1962, 27-year-old Pauline Otten jumped from the window of her ninth-floor room after an argument with her estranged husband, Dewey, who had stormed out of the suite just moments before. In a sickening twist of fate, Pauline landed on a passing pedestrian, 65-year-old George Giannini, with the impact killing them both instantly. As there were no witnesses, police initially believed that Pauline and George had taken their life together, possibly as some kind of bizarre death pact. However, it was soon determined that not only was Giannini wearing shoes at the time of his death, he also had his hands in his pockets. Had he jumped, his shoes would have likely fallen off during the fall or upon impact, and his hands would have definitely not have remained in his pockets. It's quite incredible that such an unfortunate event could even occur. There was literally not another soul on the street that day, and Pauline just so happened to land perfectly atop her unlikely victim. Again, is this purely coincidence, or was there something else at work that day? The next bizarre death to occur at the Cecil was that of 65-year-old retired telephone operator Goldie Osgood. Osgood was well known around the area and had earned the nickname of Pigeon Goldie because she fed birds in nearby Pershing Square. She was a regular sight around the square, perennially sporting the LA Dodgers baseball that she seemed to cherish so dearly. But on June 4th of 1964, a member of the Cecil's housekeeping staff entered Goldie's room to find the place had been ransacked. Birdseed was scattered all over the room, something Goldie carried around everywhere with her, and her beloved LA Dodgers cap was lying in a pool of blood just feet away from her lifeless corpse. She had been beaten, carnally violated, and then stabbed almost 30 times with a large serrated knife. Just hours after her murder, 29-year-old Jacques Ellinger was spotted walking through Pershing Square with his clothes absolutely soaked in blood. This is at a time when DNA analysis hadn't been invented yet, but since there was a literal trail of blood from Goldie's hotel room to Pershing Square, it was pretty easy to deduce that Jacques had been Goldie's killer. But this is where things get weird. Despite the killing being connected to a handful of other murders in the area, Jacques claimed that he had no memory of any murder and had in fact blacked out for a few hours, led to police dropping all charges against him. What should have been an open and shut case was muddied and crippled by some mysterious internal or external influence, and once again, the Cecil Hotel was inextricably involved somehow. Two more mysterious deaths by falling occurred at the Cecil in the years 1975 and 1992, but perhaps the most famous of all the Cecil's enigmatic deaths is that of 21-year-old Canadian college student Elisa Lam. Enrolled at the University of British Columbia, Elisa decided to do a post-Christmas trip down to California in early 2013. She traveled solo via Amtrak and inner-city buses, taking time out to visit the San Diego Zoo and eventually arriving safely in LA on January 26th. 2 days later, she checked into the Cecil Hotel, opting for one of the hotel's cheaper shared rooms on its 5th floor. However, just a day or two into her stay, her impromptu roommates began to complain that Elisa was exhibiting some rather off behavior. As a result, hotel staff decided to move Elisa into her own private room at no extra cost. It's worth noting at this stage that Elisa had been previously diagnosed with both depression and bipolar disorder and was taking 4 separate medications to combat the symptoms. However, not a single member of her family said that she had any history whatsoever of any thoughts of taking her own life. According to them, Elisa had her own struggles, but she determined to conquer adversity and lead a happy, productive life. Yet they did admit to one incident in which Elisa had gone missing for a brief period of time. Naturally, her parents were mildly concerned about her well-being during a solo trip down to Cali and asked Elisa to check in with them every day she was there. Elisa was only too happy to comply and called daily to share travel stories and swap I love yous. However, on February 1st of 2013, the very same day she was due to check out of the Cecil, her daily phone call didn't come. Elisa's parents grew increasingly worried until eventually they contacted the LAPD to report Elisa missing. Police jumped into action, driving down to the Cecil to question hotel staff. A number of the housekeeping team had seen Elisa on the day she disappeared, reporting that she was alone and that nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Police also spoke to the manager of a nearby bookstore that Elisa frequented during her stay, who told them Elisa was outgoing, lively, and very friendly, talking about what books she was getting and whether or not what she was getting would be too heavy for her to carry around as she traveled. In short, it's clear that Elisa was suffering from poor mental health, at least during the morning anyway. As a follow-up, police searched the Cecil and the surrounding area as best they could, using sniffer dogs and helicopter support. But given that no foul play was suspected, the LAPD was unable to search the entire hotel, leaving one detective with the terrible feeling that they were just inches away from finding a girl that was in grave and mortal danger. On February 6th of 2013, a week after she was last spotted, the LAPD circulated flyers with Elisa's image and brought the case to the public's attention through local media outlets. Just over a week later, having still made no progress in the case, LAPD released footage of Lamb's last known sighting, taken from an elevator surveillance camera on February 1st. The roughly 3-minute video shows a solitary Elisa making unusual movements and gestures while appearing to hide in the elevator. It also appears as if Elisa was trying to get the elevator car to move in order to escape from someone who was pursuing her. Some speculated that the bout of paranoia may have been the result of her ingesting some kind of party drug, such as MDMA, while others suggest her behavior was that of a textbook psychotic episode. Yet perhaps the most disturbing suggestion was from a self-proclaimed video editing expert who asserted that the CCTV footage had been tampered with before being released to the general public. Besides the obvious obscuring of the timestamp, this expert claimed that not only had parts of the footage been deliberately slowed down, but almost an entire 60 seconds of the footage had been erased. If this is true, it's fairly obvious why this might be done, and that's to protect the identity of someone who happened to appear in the video. Yet at the same time, could it be to protect the person responsible for Elisa's disappearance? 19 days after Elisa initially went missing, guests at the Cecil Hotel began to complain of low water pressure in their faucets and showers. This was on top of existing complaints that there was a weird taste and color to the tap water. So in the morning of February 19th, a hotel maintenance worker took the stairs up to the hotel's roof, intending to inspect the 4,000-gallon tanks that supplied the hotel's water. 3 of the 4 tanks were completely clear of any debris or blockages, but upon opening the 4th, the maintenance worker let out a blood-curdling scream as he was faced with the bloated, decomposing body of none other than Elisa Lam. 2 days later, the LA Coroner's Office released a statement saying that the cause of Elisa's death was accidental drowning, adding that her bipolar disorder played a significant factor in her untimely demise. Although the clothes she'd been wearing in the elevator's CCTV footage were found in the tank with her, she had apparently been stripped naked at some point, with a sand-like substance covering the parts of her body that weren't submerged in the water. This sand-like substance was never identified, and there remains intense speculation as to what it might have been. Analysis of Elisa's body showed that there was no evidence of physical trauma, carnal assault, or her taking her own life. Toxicology tests showed traces of the prescription medication she was using, along with a very small amount of alcohol, but no traces of other recreational drugs could be found in her bloodstream. The amount of prescription medication was found to be slightly less than the effective dose, yet experts believe this wasn't low enough to spark off any kind of psychotic episode and dismiss this as being to blame for Elisa's death. All of these details certainly make for an intensely morbid mystery, perhaps one of the most confounding aspects of the case is just how Elisa got into the water tank in the first place. You see, most of the doors and staircases that led to the hotel's roof were supposedly locked at the time the young Canadian disappeared, and only members of staff have the passcodes and keys to these passages. Any attempt to force them would have triggered an alarm at the hotel front desk, maybe even a hotel-wide fire alarm if any of the entrances were fire doors. Surely it's entirely possible that the hotel's fire escape would allow her to reach the roof unimpeded, but sniffer dogs only followed her scent about halfway up the staircase, then indicated that she must have used an open window to scramble onto the roof instead of the door, which was just feet away. On top of that, all 4 tanks were 4-by-8-foot cylinders propped up on concrete blocks, meaning there was no fixed access to them and hotel workers had to use a ladder to get a look at the water. Each was protected by heavy steel lids that would be extremely difficult to properly replace from within. Essentially, all of this pointed to the idea that someone, or something, had somehow killed Elisa and disposed of her body in the water tank, all without being detected by any of the hotel's security cameras. Of all the mysterious deaths that occurred at the Cecil Hotel, Elisa's gives us the most detailed and intimate look into what kind of fate might have befallen them. It's clear that over the years many of the hotel guests had suffered psychotic episodes or blackouts during their stays, and at a rate far higher than any other hotel in the country. And in spite of the fact that these deaths have been occurring for almost 100 years, we're still no closer to offering up concrete explanations for their untimely demises. Perhaps all of the murders, people taking their own life, and enigmatic deaths have perfectly reasonable and logical explanations to them, explanations that modern science would quite easily have explained. But perhaps there's something more sinister at work here, that the truth behind the Cecil is more akin to Stephen King's The Shining than we'd ever be comfortable admitting to ourselves.
My mother used to work in a hotel in Washington, D.C. back in the 90s as a housekeeper/maid, since she needed the money because she was a refugee from Vietnam. Even though she didn't speak much English at the time, she knew enough to get by at her job, and all the other staff and hotel guests loved her because of how sweet she was. Because of this, any high-profile guests such as the Backstreet Boys would stay at the hotel. The manager always sent my mum to clean the room, since she was so good at it. Anyway, one day a guest comes called Mr. Michelson. He checked into the most expensive suite. As usual, the manager told my mum to go take care of his room. As she got there was a "Do Not Disturb" sign, so she told the manager she would come back later. What was weird was that no one was ever allowed into his room. The man stayed for almost a month, and not once did he let staff come in to clean. However, he paid a lot, and gave a warm welcome every time he passed as staff member/housekeeper, so no one paid him any mind. Then one day came, when people didn't see him anymore, so they assumed he checked out. Even though the receptionist had no account of this, since it had been so long since the room was cleaned, and the "Do Not Disturb" sign wasn't on the door anymore, the manager told my mum to check it out, and to try and clean up what she could. As she got to the floor and unlocked the door to the room, a disturbing smell hit her. She couldn't figure it out, but she continued to survey the room, which was disgustingly messy. Her words were that it looked like someone had thrown a rave, even though no other guests seemed to have ever gone into the room besides Mr. Michelson. It had looked like he had deserted the place without telling anyone. My mum was still shocked by the smell, so she tried to track it down. As she followed her nose, she could tell it was coming from the hotel room closet. When she opened the closet, there was nothing but a cardboard box on the ground, from which the smell was resonating from. In that moment, from being a housekeeper, my mother's first instinct was to open the box and see what was in there, to clean and/or throw it out. When she opened the box, what she saw scarred her to this day. It was the rotting/decomposing head of a young woman, chopped off. My mother immediately screamed and got out of there and fainted in the elevator. Once she woke up, cops were everywhere, and the hotel was like a CSI scene. The manager told her that the resident didn't leave his real name and had used a fake credit card to check in. The head of the woman had been identified as a local sex worker. I never learnt the nitty-gritty details, but needless to say, my mum quit that same day.
This happened a few years ago, but I still think about it to this day. I was on holiday in a city on the other side of the country celebrating my 21st birthday with my best friend. We were having an amazing night out with a few too many drinks and ended up meeting two guys, Andrew and Billy. They seemed like really cool guys and we were into them, so when they asked us back to their hotel room, we said yes. Obviously a silly idea, but we were young and drunk. Things were great on the way back to the hotel room. We were all laughing and having a great time. When we got to the hotel room, there were two other men there as well, Ricky and JD, who were at least 10 to 15 years older than us. They gave us creepy vibes, but we brushed it off. We asked Andrew and Billy who these guys were, and they said that they were colleagues as they were in the city for work and the company paid for their rooms. So Andrew and Billy were in different rooms, but we were all partying in Andrew's room that he shared with Ricky. I got a little too drunk and my friend put me to bed. She said that she was going to Billy's room and asked if I would be okay with Andrew, and I said yes. Keep in mind, my friend didn't have a phone either, so we basically had no way of getting in contact with each other. Another stupid thing I know. So I'd been in the bed for a while with Andrew just talking and chilling when he says, "I just have to pop out, I'll be right back." I assumed he meant just out to the bathroom, not out of the actual hotel room, but he left the hotel room to get something from Billy's hotel room. Anyway, I was just watching TV in bed when the bedroom door opens and I assumed it was Andrew, but my heart sank when it was Ricky, the weird colleague. He walked into the room and sat on the bed. Keep in mind, I'm very naked at this point, trying to cover myself with a blanket. He said, "You do realize that everyone has left you alone in here, right? It's just you all alone. No one is here, and no one can hear you." And continued edging closer and closer to me on the bed. At this point, I was completely speechless and absolutely terrified. I was completely frozen in fear, and I had no idea what to do. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. He definitely sensed my fear, and for some reason, he just got up and left. A sense of relief flooded me, and I felt silly for overreacting. That was until I heard JD, the other random colleague, shouting, "Get the F back in here, what are you doing? This isn't what we discussed. Get back in there and do what you were meant to do. Who cares what that girl thinks? Just get back in there and do what you need to do." I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in because I was so scared, but there was no way out, and the only way out of the hotel room was through the front door, and I had to walk past Ricky and JD to get there. I was just so terrified. I had a million thoughts rushing through my head, and I had no idea what to do, but I knew that I had to escape. I decided my only option was just to leave the room and be ready to defend myself if things were to go pear-shaped. I threw my clothes on and grabbed my shoes. I opened the door and Ricky and JD were sitting on a couch close to the bedroom door. JD said, "Hey, sexy, where are you going in such a rush? Come on and join us, come here right now." I said no thanks and ran to the front door and ripped it open. When I got out, I was so relieved, but I was still in a random hotel in a random city with no way to contact my friend, but I thought my best option was to go to the lobby and just wait. As I was walking, I heard two men yelling down the hallway, "Where are you? We know you aren't too far away. Come back and join us. You know you want to." It was Ricky and JD. I was absolutely terrified by this point. I began sprinting to the elevator. I could hear them gaining on me. I never knew I could run so fast, but I just continued and didn't look back. I felt like I was running forever until I reached the end of the corridor and my worst nightmare had come true. I missed the turnoff of the elevator. So I had to turn and run back towards where I could hear Ricky and JD still yelling down the hall. I found the elevator and got in. I could hear their voices getting louder and louder, and I didn't want to imagine what would happen if they got into the elevator with me. The door finally closed after what felt like a lifetime. I thought I would go down to the lobby and just wait there because at least there would be people there, so there would be some form of safety. I got to the lobby and realized that there was no one in sight. No one at all, not even behind the desk. I sat there on the couch and didn't know what to do with myself. I was absolutely terrified that Ricky and JD would come to the lobby. And then I heard the elevator ding and the door open. My heart dropped, but it was Andrew. I told him what had happened, and he was outraged that his colleagues did that, and he took me to where my best friend was. Everything turned out to be fine, but it truly could have been a lot worse.